Welcome to the Friday Reporter. I'm Lisa Camooso Miller. As part of our August takeover with the Cook Political Report, we're talking with the people who spend every day separating political noise from political reality. Today's guest is Jessica Taylor, Senate and Governor's Editor at Cook Political Report. She's traveled the country covering campaigns. She's talked to candidates in every political environment imaginable. And she has one of the best views into what's actually happening beneath the headlines. Jessica, thanks for joining me. So, Jessica, you spend a ton of time talking to candidates and operatives, more than most other people. I'm curious what it is, one thing perhaps that you're hearing on the ground that those of us outside here in the world are not hearing.
I think that people are just angry, which I think we here in DC, but some of the anger, for instance, one of the things I hear a lot from candidates is about data centers. There is a lot of anger over, I'm seeing this pop up in the Ohio Senate race, in the Wisconsin governor's race, in the Kansas governor's race. So data centers, I think people feel like that's sort of it meshes their fear of AI, I think, with their affordability concerns, because they feel like the centers aren't paying their fair share, that it's driving up their own property taxes, that it's consuming natural resources. So I'm just hearing a ton about that. I think that's when I speak with candidates, that's one thing that comes up the most, is that's one of the most organic things that they are hearing from voters on the ground.
Do they have the right answer yet on that issue? Do you think the candidates? It's tough. It's a tough issue.
It's a tough issue. And, we saw there's some candidates that have, for instance, Vivek Ramaswamy in Ohio has invested in some of these. Rick Jackson has as well in Georgia. You actually saw the Democratic nominee for Georgia Governor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, has come out and said, basically, we need more information. We need to stick to the facts on there. I think that there's a lot of misinformation around some of these things, but people are going to believe what they see on the internet, and I think this is one thing that I see on my social media from people back home. I'm from Tennessee, and there's like a big opposition right now to a data center that might launch in my county. And that's all the posts I'm seeing from people back home. So I feel like in sort of America's heartland, I had someone say to me, data centers need better PR for what they're doing. I think that there's just a lot of misinformation out there, but we need to talk about how AI can be useful, certainly. And I think regulations for these data centers, but really without getting out there first and sort of explaining their mission and sort of how they could benefit the community and bring jobs, there's just wholesale opposition right now.
And I hear all the time from not only the teenagers that live in my home, but everywhere I go, the words AI will take my job. That's a pretty short, smart, concise. I don't know who came up with it or if it's just kind of easy to roll off the tongue. But that, plus the data centers that are very intrusive, they're noisy, they, as you said, natural resources. The reason that I think that it is going to be an issue, I couldn't agree more, is because it's just so hard to wrap our brains around it. And people have hardened opinions about it, and they will not change.
Right.
Would you say, there's nobody that's more exhausted about hearing about a change election, I'm sure, than you, because I feel like you and I have lived in a change election for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
What would you say if you were to categorize this particular midterm? Is there a way that you're looking at it differently than perhaps other midterm years?
I think there's a lot of frustration with just people in Washington. We've seen even people running for instance, in the Colorado governor's race, Michael Bennet, the senator, lost that race to the Attorney General Phil Weiser. I think that there's more trust of people, sort of state politicians and people back home than there are if you're running in DC. We saw Randy Feenstra lose the Iowa governor's primary, which was a bit of a surprise. We've seen, sort of other members of Congress run and lose races and congressional races, and races for governor. So you're right. I've been doing this for 20 years now. My very first cycle that I covered was the '08, which was, of course, the epitome of the change cycle, right. Hope and change. And so I feel like every election cycle has been a change cycle, but it's like people want the change and they get the change, but the change isn't happening fast enough. And then they get frustrated and they want to continue to change, I think, instead of, letting people get seniority and understand what's going on the Hill. I remember the 2010 election, there was such an upheaval and there were people that had no experience in politics, which sounds like a good thing until you actually get to Washington and you realize that it's not designed to work very quickly. That's not how the founders intended it. And then there's just a frustration with not getting things done. And then it's sort of, well, let's throw these bums out and put more bums in. So it definitely is a change election this cycle. And I think that just being from Washington is penalizing people right now.
What's interesting is, I talked to Erin and I talked to her about House races. House races are every 2 years. If ever there is a way to see change and see at least change in the seat or change in the leadership inside the state, not leadership certainly if you're a freshman, but you cover governors and the U.S. Senate, and that is it's a 4-year, 6-year term. They are more likely to go and to stay and potentially have a little bit of a longer runway to see change. How are you seeing that through the lens this year as it relates to, what's happening out there in these particular races?
What I love about governor's races is that they can be more about candidate-specific things than national races. So I think that, certainly we're talking about things like data centers at the national level, but it is implemented more at a local level. You see more about policing issues. You see more about, I really think COVID opened our eyes to how much impact governors have on our lives, our very daily lives. And so I think it is a place where the partisanship can break through. For instance, Kentucky would never have a Democratic senator, but they can have a Democratic governor. Vermont would never have a Republican senator, but they can have a Republican governor. So it's also sort of the last bastion of voters actually voting for the person and not necessarily the party. And I like to say it's because, there's no prize for having the most governors. Right now, Republicans narrowly have the most to 26 and Democrats have 24, and they're trying to get back to a quote unquote majority for the first time since 2010, but they're not going to get anything if they get that, versus if you're voting for Senate, you're ultimately voting for which party you want to control the White House. I remember my parents in Tennessee were diehard Republicans, but voted for a Democrat, Phil Bredesen, for governor for several years. And then when he ran for Senate in 2018, my dad was like, I like him, but I'm not voting for him for Senate because I don't want Chuck Schumer to be the majority leader. So, those things break through. So I think that governors can just get more things done. And I think that, again, it's sort of the last bastion of where candidates matter and where campaigns matter almost more than these Senate races that get swept up in the national tailwinds.
I love governors. I worked for 2 in New Jersey. I think that it is, to me, they're fun races to work on. They are a little bit different. They feel a little bit different. There's something about, and I've said this probably in all my conversations, there's a difference between the way Washington overlays a blanket, Republicans and Democrats, black and white, red versus blue. It's really different in the states. And when you see this in a governor's race, there's so many more factors at hand. I speak specifically about New Jersey because they don't have a media market. They play in the New York and the Philadelphia market. But, in the states, let's talk about the governors just for a few minutes because it's sort of close to my heart. There still is so much about how they run and change and do their campaigns that is different than we see on the national level. Social media is a big piece of it. There's so many other, podcasts, influencers, all of these other things that are happening in the state that are a little bit different than on the national level. I'm curious if you're seeing any of that or any states are standing out to you where there are marks of different movements, different things that are happening that are effective in campaigns.
I think just getting out there and going to the local level just matters so much to people. And then you can use social media to do that. I mean, I think governors when they're doing briefings, but I think just the rise in social media and the way that I've seen campaigns use that has changed. I mean, we saw that this week in Michigan with Abdul al-Sayed and him using sort of influencers for his campaign to drum up support. And certainly that helps with fundraising, and you can run a national campaign that way. But I think that we saw even just how close that race was with Haley Stevens, that, local organizing and local things still matter. Mm-hmm. So I think that you can't rely on social media alone and kind of that buzz, because I think it sort of belies what is actually happening. And are you organizing at the local level? Are you getting out there? Are you door knocking? I remember I was in Kentucky covering Andy Beshear's reelection a couple of years ago. And one thing I was hearing from people was he's literally everywhere. Like, they had a spate of tornadoes and floods and different things. And they were like, he was here immediately and he was helping us get money for the state. And he was just, I think, showing up is so important for governors. And people remember when you were there, and they also remember when you were not there if you do not show up to these things.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. And I think it's lost on the fact, here in Washington, we think of the U.S. senators. There are 2 for each state. There's only one governor.
Yeah.
For every state. It is an incredibly powerful position, and one that you're absolutely right. They have to be everywhere all the time. I'm curious, you, as you mentioned, 20 years at this now, Cook Political is known for being nonpartisan, and really has maintained that for a long time. Does that get harder? Has it gotten harder? Tell me a little bit about sort of your perspective in the last 20.
When I started, so I've been a cook for 7 now, but I've worked I've been intentional in my career of working for only nonpartisan media. And I think that's harder nowadays because there's so many places that have a point of view. But I really think that when I knew in college and really when I was even in high school that I wanted to get into journalism, I think it was because I was interested in politics, but that I didn't have a particular point of view, that I just felt like getting the information out there was so important and so critical to our democracy. So that was the role that I wanted to play in politics. But, when I started, Twitter didn't exist. Twitter kind of came in the 2010 election. And I think just when you see there's so many offshoots now, and when you see, TikToks and just people sharing things, I think just the Twitter sphere makes things difficult because we have a lot of people that will question our ratings, or someone out there that says, well, I think this should be this way. And I'm like, well, are you talking with the campaigns? Are you talking with the candidates? Are you seeing the polling data that we see? And there is also a responsibility that we have, because when we shift a race rating, it matters and it influences the race, and it can influence campaign fundraising and things. So it's a responsibility that I and my colleagues do not take lightly. And so I think that having us out there as sort of neutral arbiters is important, but it certainly has become harder to at least sort of weed out the noise, I think, that social media brings.
Yeah, and there's no question about that. And I'm sure that I feel like even in the 20 some years that I've been doing this, there has been more of a, how do I put it? There's more of they're a Republican leaning, or they're a Democratic leaning, and we didn't do that back then. We read the information, and then we went out and sought out information to support it or to change our point of view.
I think that also, with those point of view media, it's very easy to reinforce your point of view. Yeah. It's harder to challenge your point of view, to seek out those differing things that think maybe this person has a point too, or maybe this is right, and maybe I'm just hearing things in my own ecosphere. So I think that the rise of just those, you can go in your silos, you can watch one network, and you're not going to get your point of view challenged.
At those you said ecosphere. I'm going to steal that from you because I feel like that's really what they are. I mean, you can sit on an air. I since over the course of the time that I've had conversations with your colleagues, I have been a little bit more intentional about sort of leaning over to see what's on other people, because, I was on an airplane yesterday, for instance, curious about what's on somebody else's social media.
Yeah.
Not because I care, but curious about what their algorithm looks like. And it's amazing. You can be sitting next to someone in an airplane, and they could be served up an entirely different narrative about an entirely different set of issues that all influence how you feel about them. And that's something different and new that's also there, which is why we continue to need these nonpartisan, fact-based platforms like yours more than ever.
Thank you.
I want to know, though, the one thing I learned over the past couple of conversations I've had that I did not realize, and maybe I should have known, is that you guys meet with candidates all the time. Who is it in this cycle that we should be watching more closely? Who's a candidate that surprised you or gave you more of a moment to pause and want to learn more about them?
Yeah. One of the candidates I met with very early on, and I met with him about twice subsequently, is Rob Sand in Iowa. He's running for governor, a Democrat, the only Democratic elected statewide governor. He's running a really strong race. I would actually say he's a slight favorite. Right now we have the race and toss-up, but it's trending his way. Republicans do not feel great about this. He is someone that is out there in all of Iowa's counties. He holds county meetings that he calls them. He says, not redder or bluer, but better and truer. He opens by, singing God Bless America and America the Beautiful and with a prayer. I mean, I think he's someone that is sort of trying to cross those party lines in different ways. That does make it kind of interesting to me.
I think that that's something that's especially interesting to a lot of people. And I draw the comparison as it relates to those who perhaps pulled the lever for the guy who's in the White House and also pulled the lever for the guy who's in Gracie Mansion.
Right.
And a lot of it is not necessarily about red or blue issues, but about how they made voters feel about the way they wanted to attack issues. And so I feel like there's maybe a horseshoe, if you will, where the two ends are starting to find their ways together. Are you seeing any of that?
I think communication style is really key. And if you can keep on the issues, for instance, another thing I've had a Democratic senator say to me is like, we just need our candidates to be normal. Like we have the issues on our side, but like when you come across as just outside of the mainstream or trying to be too PC or different things. And I think right now, someone who's getting caught in that trap is Francesca Hong in Wisconsin. She went viral this week for her sort of answer about Thanksgiving when, she's a Democratic Socialist. Mamdani is too. And I had a Wisconsin Democrat text me and said if that was Mamdani and he was asked about Thanksgiving, he would have been like, well, the Trump administration is making Thanksgiving more expensive. You're going to be paying more at the table because of tariffs and different things. Like that's how he would have answered that question. Instead, she kind of got caught in those tropes and different things and falling back into it. I mean, and you can have people that believe the same things, but if you're not communicating it well, it gets lost.
That's making my job security that much more fortified. That is for sure. What would you say, Jessica? Is there a narrative? There's so much of everything. Politics. Amy hit it on the head the other day when we were talking about how there are hobbyists and then there are those of us that have actually worked in the business for a long time. And that's all fine and good, but it makes it a little difficult for us to cut through the noise.
Yeah.
What do you think a political narrative that is maybe overblown at this point here in 2026?
Honestly, I think that it's the Democrats are going to romp everywhere. I think that the House is a lot closer than it looks like, which I'm sure Aaron went into with you just because of redistricting. And that just because we have had so much, there's just fewer competitive states right now. And I think that if Democrats were to massively overperform even at the same levels of 2020, like 2018, you're just not going to get the massive shift there. I think also, I think that people also just immediately think, well, just because the political environment is so bad and Trump's numbers are so bad, that they can win the Senate. And they might. As we sit here, at the beginning of August, I still think Republicans are favored and maybe things shift, but it is not easy to win at least 2 double-digit Trump states. Like those voters are just very dialed in, and there's just so few actual independent swing voters. So I think that people from the outside look in and say things are so bad, like this must be going to be a Democratic romp. And I think that that there's some Democrats that might be disappointed if, they don't wake up on election day and Democrats won 30 House seats or something. Just with how close it is, a victory is a victory, and I think you have to look at it that way. I think another thing being overblown is that, that it's far left candidates that are succeeding everywhere in primaries. Because yes, you've had Abdullah Syed that won Graham Plattner before he imploded winning in Maine. But if Democrats win the Senate, it's going to be because of centrist candidates. It's going to be because of candidates like Roy Cooper in North Carolina, because of Sherrod Brown in Ohio and Mary Peltola in Alaska, because of someone like Josh Torek in Iowa that they were able to get through the primary, that has a very compelling personal story. He's a Paralympian, won two gold medals in basketball at the Olympics, at the Paralympics. So I think that they didn't have backlash to those types of candidates. I think it's because they've proven that they can win in those red states. So, for all of the talk about it's socialists, it's progressives and everything, when you get down to sort of the brass tacks of it, those seats that are the most vulnerable and that Democrats have the best place of picking up, they didn't have backlash to their candidates because they were broadly popular and because Democrats did a good job at recruiting them.
It's so easy to get swept up in that drama, though, boy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's wild. It's so incredibly interesting to me, too. And I'm curious because you've watched trends over the years. During when Joe Biden was president, we expected there to be a red wave in that midterm, and there was not. This potentially could be another place where people are saying it's going to be a Democratic blowout, and it's perhaps not. Is that also due to the fact that redistricting everywhere has tightened this country in a way that the districts just don't move as much as they once did?
I mean, when I talk to groups, I remind them that most of these elections are decided in primaries, and they're usually in either safe races or safe districts or safe states. And so fewer and fewer people vote in primaries. So it's the extremes of each party that are picking those. And if your motivation as a politician is to get reelected and you're most worried about a primary, you have less incentive to compromise. I truly believe that the places one of the reasons that we are so polarized right now is because there's just fewer competitive states and there's fewer competitive districts. And you look at states that have different types of elections, and you can get a Susan Collins in Maine because there is a ranked choice voting system. You can get a Lisa Murkowski in Alaska because Alaska has a top 4 primary system with ranked choice voting. And there was a movement a few years ago for other states to do something like this, like Nevada almost passed it. There was a movement in Arizona, and those have been pushed back. In fact, Alaska has been trying to repeal theirs. And I just think that if you aren't having more people across just participate in primaries, and, if you have all party primaries, you get a broader swath of people picking the voters. I think we need to look at the way that our voting system is happening right now too, and that's contributing to the polarization.
I worry about that too, though, because anytime we talk about voter reform or voting reform, it once was something that was perceived to be for the better of the country, and now it's been so politicized.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the other thing. So to your point, I think a lot of people at one point were curious and interested in the idea of reform for the Electoral College, reform for some of the ways that we decide on candidates. And that has now been challenged in a way that worries me, not necessarily for one party or another, but overall, because it's such a foundation of who we are, the way that we vote, and the fact that it is so secure. Are you seeing any of that in the States? Are people worried? Are they concerned? Do they doubt whether or not their vote really matters?
I think people do doubt whether their vote really matters. And I think that's one reason why there's a lot of people that don't come out when it's not a presidential year. One of the things that's interesting to me is that we talk about sort of the Trump phenomenon, that voters aren't coming out when he's not on the ballot. The Obama coalition didn't come out when he wasn't on the ballot either. We've seen the two major political leaders of the past 20 years, and they didn't do much to build their party beyond their own bases. And I think that Obama really left Democrats in an lurch at a state level, and we saw that really have implications on 2016. And Trump very clearly does not care about the direction of the Republican Party unless it benefits him. And so a lot of the things that he's doing is not helping, build up a Republican Party that can outlast him. And, Obama did it in a very different way and not with the same rhetoric that Trump has done for sure. But Obama has not left, his coalition did not last beyond him. So I think that, are we going to see leaders over the next century that try to build party first? Or is it just that the party is losing influence and that it becomes more person centric when you have such strong personalities like Obama and Trump are?
I was going to ask about that cult of personality because it really feels like that's sort of the direction that the party and the country has gone.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's because that's the way people get attention and people get motivated to go to the polls. All right. So I have a lightning round for you, Jessica. Okay. I'm curious about a couple of different things, and time is running short.
Yeah.
No hard questions here and no wrong answers. What's a state to watch?
Kansas. We talk either Iowa or Kansas. It's the heartland. The tariffs are really impacting people. I'm really intrigued. We shifted a Kansas rating this week. We have the pastor of the largest United Methodist church in the country running as a Democrat against Roger Marshall, who's raising a lot of money. Marshall isn't raising a lot of money. So is he kind of being caught asleep at the wheel? Is this a person in the same way, has sort of the stirring rhetoric like Raphael Warnock had? I mean, comes from a white church background, mainline church, but is this someone that may be worth watching? So that's who I'm thinking about this week, at least. So
that's good. I mean, that's good to watch. I mean, I'm always curious, and I like to. There's 50 states and a lot of races to watch in each one of them. So I'm always curious about which one is one to watch. Best campaign stop food.
Oh gosh. When I've been in Wisconsin, I love the cheese curds. And apparently I haven't been storing them right. When I was talking with someone else, like, you can't store them in the fridge. I didn't know that. So as a Southerner, so you're supposed to not put them in the fridge, which I feel like it doesn't make sense to me. But next time I get them, I will not put them in the fridge. So
doesn't seem like it would pack well if it wasn't cold, but these are things to know. That's hilarious. Yeah. Most underrated campaign skill.
I think just we kind of, in the age of social media, we want people that can deliver these stirring speeches and have cute TikToks and different things. But I think the one-on-one retail campaigning still matters. So I think, I think that people remember when they meet you. And I think the candidates that are more successful are ones that are going out there, they're pressing the flesh. They're going to every sort of nook and cranny. So
I think that's fair. And I think it's also important. We feel like if we influence only one person, then we haven't influenced enough. But I also feel like word of mouth and those kinds of exchanges are also incredibly valuable, and they still really do work. Perhaps I think social media. I think
I'm just nostalgic for sort of those days, because I remember my parents taking me to campaign rallies and stuff when I was growing up. And I love the early states. I mean, it doesn't look like we're going to have like New Hampshire, but in Iowa and everything. Like, I remember when I've been in New Hampshire, like, these people take their responsibility very seriously of meeting all the candidates and doing things like that. So, I actually got into politics, though. One of the reasons I decided I wanted to cover it is because I went to college in South Carolina, and I was, as a student newspaper reporter in the 2004 election, we had candidates that were coming by. So I was getting to meet and interview John Kerry and John Edwards and Howard Dean and everything. And so I think I saw sort of that retail campaigning that mattered in a state like South Carolina.
Where in South Carolina did you go?
Furman University. Go Paladins.
Okay. All right. I'm about to launch a young kid off to College of Charleston. So now I'm going to always ask about South Carolina.
Yeah.
If there were, last question, because we've run out of time. This was so fun, Jessica. I'm so excited. If there were one political myth that people believe that they should stop believing, is there something that stands out for you?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think that social media buzz is going to translate to votes. Because I think, I'll get questions from friends and stuff, and they're like, I saw this really cool candidate in like a really tough state, and like they're so cool, like they've got to win, right? And I'm like, that's like a 20 plus Trump state, So I think that, you can run campaigns and you can raise money and different things, but the fundamentals are still the fundamentals, I think.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. There's always that hope. Lots of my Democrat friends are very optimistic about Texas, but they've seen this all before, so they're not going to hold their breath.
I call Texas Democrats Lucy in the football because I feel like it gets held out there and like they have so much hope and then it gets pulled back at the last minute.
I've heard that too. It's also true about Republicans in New Jersey from time to time. Mitch McConnell himself actually said that to me once. So, Jessica, this was so fun. I'm so excited about this conversation. Keep yourself hydrated. It's going to be a busy season. I'm so glad to have had a chance to chat with you.
I really enjoyed it, Lisa. Thank you.
I'm so thrilled that Jessica had some time to visit with us today during a very, very busy season. Thanks to her, and thanks to all of you for listening to The Friday Reporter. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and don't miss the rest of our conversations this month with the team at Cook Political Report. I'm Lisa Camooso Miller. We'll see you next time.